Welcome back to segment 2 of True News. I'm Rick Wiles. Our focus in this segment of the program will be the historic events taking place in Rome with the sudden resignation of Pope Benedict XVI. Following the announcement of his resignation, lightning struck St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City. This is the first time a pope has resigned in 600 years. Furthermore, the Catholic Church will be without a pope after February 28th until the new pope is chosen by the cardinals in March. And after he's chosen, there will be 2 popes alive simultaneously. And Catholics are wrestling with the question, will Pope Benedict remain infallible after he is replaced? At 8 p.m. on February 28th, Pope Benedict will no longer be pope, and the Vatican will go into a period when the Catholic Church declares that the seat of St. Peter is vacant. The interim period is governed by ancient rituals and obscure Vatican institutions. All heads of Vatican departments cease to exercise their office until the new pope is installed, with the exceptions of the Vicar of Rome, who continues to provide pastoral care for people in the city of Rome, and the major penitentiary, the official who grants absolutions and dispensations. Also at 8:01 p.m. on February 28th, the Vatican Secretary of State, Cardinal Tarcisco Bartoni, will lose his position as the Vatican's prime minister. But Cardinal Bartoni also holds the position of Camerlengo of the Holy Roman Church. He and the Apostolic Chamber will run the Vatican State and be in charge of the Vatican Bank and the Church's properties until the new pope arrives. By the way, outgoing Pope Benedict replaced the head of the Vatican Bank, Ettore Gatti Tedeschi. The new Vatican Bank chief is German industrialist and aristocrat Ernest von Freyberg. Mr. von Freyberg is a member of the 900-year-old Sovereign Military Order of Malta. The secret conclave of 117 cardinals that will choose the next pope will convene as early as March 15. Irish newspapers have speculated that the new pope will be named on St. Patrick's Day, March 17. The speculation, of course, is whether the next pope will be the last pope before the end of the world. I'm referring to the prophecy declared by Irish priest St. Malachi in 1039 that named all the popes until Jesus Christ returns. The list is eerily accurate. If St. Malachi's prophecy of the pope was a true prophetic message from the Holy Spirit, then the next pope will be Petrus Romanus, or Peter the Roman. Well, there's nobody on the planet more qualified to talk about this topic than my guest, Dr. Tom Horn. He is the co-author of the best-selling book, Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope is Here. Chris Putnam, the other co-author, was here on True News last week, and Tom and Chris predicted in the book that Pope Benedict would resign for health reasons in either 2012 or 2013. Tom is also the founder of the popular website, RaidersNewsUpdate.com. Tom Horn, welcome back to True News.
Hey, Rick, always good to be on the radio with you.
This is a truly historic time in the world. There's a lot of things happening here. Whether you're Roman Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, or whatever, the fact is there are 1 billion Roman Catholics in the world. The Pope is not only a major religious leader, but he's also the head of state with embassies around the world. So you can't ignore what is taking place. This is truly a significant development in the fact that we're going to have 2 popes alive at the same time. There's a period of time where the Vatican is without a pope. And then we have this St. Malachi prophecy that the next pope could be the last pope. Well, I know, Tom, your phone must be ringing nonstop since Pope Benedict's resignation.
Yeah, it has been for a couple of reasons. One, of course, because we wrote the book, Petrus Romanus, which came out in 2012. Came out about 1 year ago. You and I actually did a show or two on it at that time, and came out in March or April of last year. That's how good my memory is. I wrote the book, don't even know when it came out. Gray hair, right? But yeah, and in that book, well, we did a couple of things. One, we speculated that Pope Benedict would step down in March or April of 2012. Now, we won't have time on this show to go into all the point-by-point reasoning behind that speculation. And then we concluded that if he didn't retire in March or April of 2012, we believed that he would retire sometime before the end of 2013. It turns out, oddly, that we were right on both occasions. We found out just this last week when he turned in his resignation. The New York Times interviewed the editor, Giovanni Maria Vian, who's the editor for the El Observatorio Romano, right, which is the paper that's owned by the Vatican. And we found out that the Pope actually turned in his resignation in March of 2012, right when we said that he would, but they kept it secret. In fact, only a handful, 6 or less, cardinals were even aware that he had turned in his resignation. That's why so many of them were actually taken off guard by his announcement this year in 2013. So we were right. Now people have been calling me. We're doing all these radio shows. There's movie deals. The people that produce the Terminator movies want, rights to produce a movie based on the book. All this stuff's coming at us. And but one thing I want to poo-poo right now, and that is people been referring to me as a prophet, and I don't accept that. I'm not a prophet. All I am is a Rick Wiles kind of analytical guy who, takes all of the known material, puts it all in a pile, and tries to make sense out of it. And sometimes what I do is guess.
You're a dot connector. You just do what I do. You connect dots.
Yeah. And that's what we did. We connected the dots. That's why if we would have been true prophets, would have said on March, this date, that's when he's going to retire. We didn't do that.
You wouldn't have to do all the research if you're a prophet.
Well, there was research that there was a couple of key pieces. Was one, his birthday was coming up in April. The Pope himself, Benedict, had argued last year that it would be okay for a pope to step down if he got to the point where he was no longer capable of fulfilling his duties as the pontiff. So first, that was the first red flag that went up, that he might be considering abdicating the throne of Peter. Secondly, his brother, who is a priest, was pushing for him to step down on his birthday, which was in April. But far more metaphysical was the 60-plus-year-old codex that we had actually discovered. This had been in obscurity for decades. Nobody was even aware of it, and it was called The Mysterious Prophecy of the Popes, which was written in French by a Jesuit who was an academic for Rome. He actually taught in their universities in Eindhoven, Belgium. But he wrote this book, 1951. It was published, and then 1952, just a few months later, he died. And that's why his book fell out of print, fell into obscurity, was written in French, so the English-speaking world wasn't even aware of it anyway, and few people in France were. But we found it. We tracked it down. We found it. There was only 2 printed copies known to be in existence. We negotiated one through a university, scanned it, had it we translated it into English. And René Thibault, the Jesuit codebreaker for Rome, he was a mystic. He was a Catholic mystic. He was a seer. He was also a scholar and a mathematician, and he was a codebreaker. And so his unique perspective on the prophecy of the popes, he was a true believer that it was an inspired prophecy. His work was a genius. We spent a lot of time in the first part of our book, Petrus Romanus, providing this information to the world. Since then, we've had Italian media that have contacted us to get a copy of that book because they can't get it either, and we've sent it to them. And it's just an astonishing work, but he is the one who found codes, anagrams, inside the prophecy of the popes that led him to conclude that the next to the last pope, which was Pope Benedict, that this pope would step down in March or April of 2012. So there's a lot of stuff here that raises intrigue around what the Pope Benedict was saying, what his brother was saying, and then what this codebreaker who died 60 years ago had predicted.
Tom, I want to make sure I'm following you. Are you saying that this Jesuit seer who died 60 years ago said that this pope would resign in 2012?
He said that the seat would open for Petrus Romanus in March or April of 2012.
Oh, okay. Now you're freaking me out, Tom.
Yeah, we translated this into English. And by the way, for everybody that buys the book Petrus Romanus, we were only going to do this for a little while last year, and then we decided to just make it permanent. We've been providing a DVD that has literally thousands of pages of documents, but what a lot of people are wanting the DVD for is it has in French and in English the works of René Thibault called The Mysterious Prophecy of the Popes, published 1951. And this guy, he was astonishing. First of all, Rick, he makes a compelling case that regardless of from what source it was inspired, so in other words, you could say it was divinely inspired, demonically inspired. He doesn't get involved in that. He doesn't care what you think about that. He himself believed that it was divinely inspired, but he's really not argumentative. Then he takes this very complex mathematical, cryptographical, anagrammatical, even solar activities. This is a very complex book from an academic, and shows from multiple angles, not just one angle, multiple angles that point to one date in particular, when the next to the last pope would resign, opening the seat for the throne of Peter to Petrus Romanus, and he said it's 60, actually now, it was written in 51, so what is that, 63 years ago, that he said this would happen in March or April of 2012. And we chronicle all of that in our book, Petrus Romanus.
Tom, how do you account for the Jesuits' accuracy in that prediction?
Well, two things. One, it could be the prophecy was truly inspired and that he himself was truly inspired in breaking it down and coming to the knowledge about when that seat would open for Petrus Romanus. We took kind of the same angle. We actually took a critical view of the prophecy of the popes pre-1595 when it was published. We think that somebody tinkered with the original document, but 1595 it's published by Arnold de Wyan in his massive 1,800-page book Lignum Vitae, and from that time and forward, some of these prophecies have been astonishing. So, how was he correct? And how have these prophecies since that time until now seemed to play out as correctly as they have? Well, what you have to understand, your listening audience, is this. You may have read recently on the news where some media are saying that the prophecy of the popes has never been accepted by the Vatican, and that academics for the Vatican reject it as a hoax. Now, the problem with saying that is that's only partly true. There were some Jesuits, especially among the Vatican, who wrote about the prophecy of the popes as being a hoax. But there were also Jesuits like René Thibault who believed that it was not a hoax, that it was real. And we, in our book Petrus Romanus, we list significant numbers of Catholic academics who have believed in this prophecy for a long time, including cardinal electors who even tried to manipulate particular popes so that they would be seen as fulfilling the prophecy of the popes. And this going back over a long period of time. So this then is the question. Is the prophecy accurate in a supernatural sense, that it foresaw who these popes would be, or is it something that some of the College of Cardinals for hundreds of years have been using as a roadmap? In other words, for some reason they put stock in it, and therefore they're electing popes who in some way or the other could be seen as fulfilling the prophecy of the popes. One way or the other, something like that is happening here.
Tom, for the benefit of listeners who don't know about, say, Malachi's prophecy, again, year 1039, give them a very brief description of the prophecy and what it says about the last pope.
Okay. This is a prophecy. It was hidden for hundreds of years inside the highly guarded vaults of the Vatican Library. Saint Malachy, to whom it is ascribed, was a Catholic priest in the 1100s in Armagh, Northern Ireland, who gained fame. Later, he was raised to sainthood. He was considered to have the gifts of healing and prophecy. And according to the legend, in 1139, he went to Rome to meet with Pope Innocent II on church business. And then upon leaving the Seven Hills City, he allegedly experienced what is today considered a famous vision, commonly called the prophecy of the popes. in which something came upon him, and he sat down and he started writing out these Latin verses, a list of Latin verses predicting each of the Roman Catholic popes, the one that would follow Pope Innocent II, which was Pope Celestine II, down to the final pope, Peter the Roman, whose reign would end in the destruction of Rome. And according to this ancient prophecy, this is a 900-year-old medieval Catholic prophecy. According to this prophecy, the pope that is elected now, within a few weeks, the one following Benedict XVI, is the final pontiff, Petrus Romanus, or Peter the Roman. And in English, here's what the last segment of the prophecy of the popes says in describing the coming of Petrus Romanus. It says, quote, "In the extreme persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, who will nourish the sheep in many tribulations. When they are finished, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people, the end." Now, that's the last line, and both Catholic and Protestant scholars have interpreted that as saying that this is the time that the church is going to enter into the Great Tribulation period, because it says he will reign during the tribulations, and at the end of it, the city of 7 hills, Rome, would be destroyed, and the dreadful judge, right? So this is the second coming of Christ. The dreadful judge will judge his people. Now, what's interesting about this is how there is a connection between 2012 and 2013. And 3 weeks ago, on other radio show, when I was being interviewed by Steve Quayle, this is another reason I'm so busy right now, I said that the resignation of Pope Benedict was imminent. And 2.5 weeks later, actually, he retired, and everybody said, "How in the world did Tom Horn?" I got emails saying, "Who's your insider at the Vatican?" Well, I got no insider at the Vatican unless it's the Holy Spirit. I was making that conclusion, again, for metaphysical reasons, for spiritual reasons, that our 600 pages in Petrus Romanus details, and we don't have time to outline today. But there was a second thing that was in the back of my mind, Rick, and that is, not only did you have this 900-year-old Catholic prophecy, not only did you have the code breaking of René Thibault, which has been uncanny in its accuracy, but there was also a 700-year-old prophecy by Jewish Orthodox priests. And they were prophesying, this is in the Zohar, and if you want me to keep going and talk about this,
Yes, sir, go ahead. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
This was in the Zohar. It also is astonishing because it's set in the Jewish calendar, and its prediction is for the year 5773. Now, in the Jewish calendar, that began in September of 2012 and extends into this year in August 2013. So their calendar's not like our Gregorian calendar. They don't go from January to December like we do. They prophesied the year 5773, which connected our Gregorian date of 2012 to 2013, suggesting that this could start playing out at any time between September of last year and August of this year. Now, that's astonishing, because when you read this 700-year-old prophecy, you have to keep in mind that the prophecy of the popes had not even been published. It was hidden in the Vatican archives. The world wasn't even aware of it until 1595, and a couple of hundred years before that, these Jewish priests write in, and I'll just read it to your audience real fast, they write something in the Zohar that is incredible. The Zohar, for those who may not know, it is considered to be the most important work of Jewish Kabbalah, or mysticism. It's a collection of books written in medieval Aramaic 700 years ago, contains mystical commentary on the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, the Torah. But in addition to interpreting the Old Testament, there's a section in the Zohar called the Vayera section that includes a subsection called the Signs Heralding Mashiach, or the Coming of the Messiah. Now, the fascinating date that they set for his appearance is 5773. This began 5 months ago, and it will conclude this year in 2013. And here's the important point for the listener. Given the rejection of Jesus by Orthodox Jews as Messiah, Christians would understand this prophecy in the Zohar as heralding the coming of the Antichrist sometime between 2012 and 2013. Now, I'm going to be writing a lot about this in coming weeks because you had the election of a U.S. president in 2012. You had the resignation unofficially, well, actually officially, but unknown to the world, secretly, at the Vatican of the Pope in 2012. But in 2013, you have the President of the United States, following his inauguration, going to Israel preaching peace, peace, at the same time that we're having the conclave in Rome to elect who, according to these prophecies, is going to be the final pope. And both of these prophecies, unknown to their individual authors. The Zohar, unknown to the writer of the Prophecy of the Popes, because it was written hundreds of years later. The Prophecy of the Popes, unknown to the writers of the Zohar, because it was concealed inside the Vatican archives and not published until after the Zohar prediction. And yet one is saying that the Antichrist will appear in between 2012 to 2013, and the other is saying the final pope will appear between 2012 to 2013. So I'll just quickly read you the prophecy because I realize I'm going on and on here.
No, go ahead. We have plenty of time. Go ahead, Tom.
Okay, here's what it says. And the other thing to note about these prophecies is that both of them sound almost identical in their descriptions of how Rome will be destroyed, though one of them is talking about the appearance of the Antichrist and the other is talking about the appearance of the final pope, who some, including some Catholic writers, believe to be will be an antipope. He will serve the position of the false prophet, a biblical thing. So here's what it says. In the year, I'm quoting now, in the year 5773, the kings of the world will assemble in the great city of Rome. Now, let me stop from the quote for a moment. The only time, Rick, unless you can tell me some other time, the only time we could imagine that representatives of all of the nations of the world would be gathered in Rome at the Vatican City would be during a conclave. There's no other time that I know that all of the nations of the world would gather in Rome.
And how do you explain that as all the nations of the world?
Well, what this says is the kings of the world will assemble in the great city of Rome. So I interpret this as if I send my ambassador, he represents me. So all of the nations of the world are going to have representation. Some of the nations, of course, it's the king, it's the leader, it's the president, it's whoever is going to physically, literally travel to Rome during conclave. Others will send their ambassador, but the ambassador represents the king. So there will be representation of the kings of the world assembled in the great city of Rome. So let me start over. Here's what it says in the Zohar. In the year 5773, the kings of the world will assemble in the great city of Rome, and the Holy One will shower on them fire and hail and meteoric stones until they are destroyed, with the exception of those who will not yet have arrived there. Now, isn't that interesting? Because what it's describing is something's going on in Rome. Representation from all of the nations of the world are going there for some reason. Some of them haven't yet arrived when all of a sudden fiery objects start falling from the heaven. And it destroys those who would come down. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but what I'm saying is this almost seems to be describing a terrorist attack during a conclave. That's what it seems to be describing. Now, if it turns out that that's not what happens, I'll be thankful that a lot of people didn't get killed.
Tom, is this the same prophecy? Over the years, I've read various Catholic prophecies that talk about the cardinals fleeing, the Pope and the cardinals fleeing Rome because the city is burning.
Yes, there are. Well, first of all, we're talking about two different things. I'm reading a prophecy from the Zohar.
Okay, so that's the Jewish Kabbalah.
That's the Jewish prophecy that was made 700 years ago. And what I'm saying is, it sounds astonishingly like the Catholic prophecy.
Yes, okay.
And it also sounds like the last line in the prophecy of the popes, where it says that the final pope will reign during the tribulation, and when that's finished, Rome will be destroyed, and the great and terrible judge will judge his people. This one from the Zohar also mentions Rome, says the kings of the earth are gathering there, and the Holy One showers on them fire and hail and meteoric stones. And then listen to what it says. These will commence. Now, okay, whoever survives because it says, with the exception of those who haven't yet arrived there, these will commence anew to make war. And from that time, the Messiah will begin to declare himself, and around him there will be gathered many nations and many hosts from the uttermost parts of the earth. So this prophecy gives us very specific details. One, representation from the nations of the world are going to be gathered in Rome. Secondly, fiery objects are going to fall on them from heaven. The only ones that aren't going to be killed were the ones that were en route there and hadn't yet arrived. Then the nations of the world are going to respond to whatever this was with war. That's why I don't think this is talking about meteors. That's why I think this is more likely talking about a terrorist attack on the Vatican during a conclave. And again, this is all speculation. I'm just trying to read into what I'm seeing here. But that from that moment forward, the Messiah is going to begin to declare himself, which in evangelical and Catholic interpretation would not be the Messiah per se. It'd be the Antichrist. It'd be a false Messiah. So you have a 700-year-old Jewish prophecy that, using language that sounds almost identical to the Catholic prophecies that depict an end times event in which the final pope arrives, Rome is destroyed, and we experience the Great Tribulation period on earth.
Tom, a few minutes ago, you mentioned the fact that the conclave to choose the new pope will be taking place approximately the same time that Barack Obama will be making his visit to Jerusalem. And I personally, I'm going to be watching to see if he times his entry into Jerusalem to coincide with the entry of Jesus Christ into Jerusalem before the crucifixion. That would be very interesting to see.
It would be, and you know as well as I do that even in both of his elections, but especially the first one, he went out of his way to be seen. You know, there were people who even got donkeys and went ahead of them with these little, figurines of Obama riding down the streets, and they were waving palm branches ahead of him, reminiscent of the triumphant entry of Jesus Christ.
And throughout his 4 years, going into this fifth year, this man has permitted his followers to refer to him in godlike terms. They say he's godlike, he's a Messiah, he is a savior. They deify Barack Obama, and he has never rebuked them. He has never chastised anybody. He has never renounced these claims by his followers. So he clearly enjoys his followers referring to him as a Messiah, a savior. So now we have this guy going to Jerusalem. At the same time, the 117 cardinals will be meeting in Rome to choose the next pope. This is really amazing stuff that's happening, Tom. Hey, a lot of people are trying to they're researching the various cardinals, to see how many of them are named Peter. Now, I've been trying to explain to people through emails and phone calls that his birth name does not need to be Peter in order to be Petrus Romanus. Do you want to speak about that?
In one sense, the title Petrus Romanus could simply just be an oblique reference to the last pope, because every pope sits on the throne of Peter. Now, they wouldn't take the name Peter because that's against their rules or their laws. Well, somebody might, but they've always considered that to be unwise, to take the name Peter II, if you will.
Would you be shocked if this next pope declares himself Peter II?
Well, that would be absolutely shocking, and he would certainly then be considered by a lot of the church to be an antagonist. But it's possible, but the point is that that doesn't have to happen for him to fulfill the prophecy, because every pope sits on the throne of Peter. In fact, Catholic academics constantly refer, or have in the past, to whoever the current pope is as the, quote, latest Peter in the line, end quote. So that's a common phraseology. So whoever the pope is, he's the latest Peter in the line. Now, how could he fulfill the prophecy of the popes to be Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman? That could happen in a lot of ways. One, anybody could be elected the pope and fulfill this prophecy. One of the people in our top 10 list from the book Petrus Romanus is Mark Poulet, for instance, the Canadian cardinal. Whether he'll be elected or not, I have no idea, but he was in our original top 10 list. If he then took, because once you're elected pope, you take a different name, like Cardinal Ratzinger became Pope Benedict XVI. Coulet or anybody like him could be elected who has nothing to do with the name Peter, but then take a name that somehow associates them with another pope in history that was somehow associated with Peter. Secondly, and what could be more directly astonishing is there is a significant list right now in the top five, in the top five odds makers in the world right now for who will be the next pope. There's an astonishing way in which every one of them could be associated with Peter the Roman. For instance, today's top odds is one of the top 10 from our Petrus Romanus list last year, and that's Cardinal Angelo Scola. Well, Cardinal Scola is an Italian. So if he was elected pope, he would literally be Peter the Roman because he is an Italian. Any other Italian who is elected as the pope could be thought of in the same way. There's a connection, by the way, between Angelo Scola and the VatiLeaks scandal from last year. Now, whether that will create some concern among the cardinal electors that might shy away from him, I don't know, but I do know that there were those who thought that Scola was working behind the scenes against another Italian, and that's the current Secretary of State, Tarcisio Bertoni, who many believe, and we wrote in the book, Petrus Romanus, that a lot of VatiLeaks was actually happening as an invisible internal behind-the-scenes scandal that was going on where you had these various cardinals who were positioning themselves to be the next pope, and they were trying to mudsling against Tarcisio Bertoni. But having said that, Angelo Scola may be today's number one pick, but probably today's number two pick on all of the odds maker screens right now still would be Tarcisio Bertoni. And he was born in Romano, Canvales. I can't even say the words in Italy, but so he would quite literally be Peter the Roman. And as you said at the opening of this show, he is the current Secretary of State. After the 28th of this month, beginning March 1. He will stop his duties as the Secretary of State, but he is the Pope's Carmelingo.
He's fairly old, isn't he?
He's 78, I believe. He would be an older, and that's one of the things that might weigh against him. Mm-hmm. See, the logic has been for the last few years that Pope Benedict was kind of a fill-in pope, if you will.
Right.
They were willing to elect somebody old, transitional pope. But the next pope, they want somebody that can be in there for a long time, so you're going to be looking for a younger pope. But there's actually been some theology recently coming out of Rome in which they're talking about they should even limit the term of the pope. Whether they will, I don't know, but there are Catholic scholars who believe that by electing a pope and then letting him sit in there for life is probably an archaic idea that ought to be done away with, and so they ought to elect popes that are going to serve like a U.S. president, 4 terms, another 4 terms, and then you're out of there. Now, if they did that, a 78-year-old Tarcisio Bertoni, Peter the Roman, it might not be such a problem.
Well, the reason I'm asking, Tom, is because if this prophecy of Malachi is accurate, if it is of God, and this next pope is the last pope, then the age of the next pope could tell us a lot about how much time we have left on this planet. Because if he is in his late 70s, early 80s, then we're in for a short ride. If he's in his 50s or his early 60s, I mean, he could be there for 20 to 30 years. But if he's close to 80, I mean, what's the max that he's going to be sitting in on the seat of Peter for 5-10 years at the max? So it tells me a lot about how much time we have left if this prophecy is true.
True, yeah.
Hey, we got about 6-7 minutes. I got a list of things I want to ask you real quickly. Over the years, a lot of people have said to me, Rick, the last pope will be an evil pope. And, they use the term black pope, not referring to skin color, but to spiritual darkness, because the pope wears white, and they're saying that the last pope will be a black pope. He'll be an evil pope. Where does that stuff come from? Where do those predictions, prophecies come from?
Well, both from turn-of-the-century Protestant writers and also from some Catholic writers. I mean, we provided a huge list of Catholic writers throughout time who predicted that at the end of time, Rome would become apostate and an antipope would be elected who was under the influence of Satan. And Malachi Martin wrote about that, but others, Monsignor Luigi Marinelli, Cardinal Henry Manning wrote significant research. It was published in at least two different books. Bishop Salvador Zola, Frederick William Helly, just numerous ones have written over the years that this final pope would be under the influence of Satan, and that he won't be a true pope. In other words, he's not going to truly represent the Catholic Church or the true believers. He's going to be an anti-pope, and he's going to seize the throne, and he's going to use it for his own diabolical purposes. And so that's partly where some of that comes from. And if people want the long history of that, then they can get the book Petrus Romanus, and some of that will be astonishing. Some of that will be new information to a lot of modern Catholics who did not know that in the history of Roman Catholicism, many of their own greatest seers believed that a final pope would be under the control of Satan and would actually lead the church into the Great Tribulation period.
But the Malachi prophecy says that he will nourish his people during the time of tribulation. Okay. Okay, somewhere, I don't know where, I read this over the last couple of days as I was preparing for this conversation with you. Somewhere I came across a connection to Patrick. Is there a connection to Patrick and Petrus Romanus?
Yeah, what some people are saying is that if the current conclave plays out correctly, then you could have a pope elected by St. Patrick's Day. And that's where they're making that connection.
No, somewhere I saw something in history that there was some connection to the name Patrick to Petrus Romanus.
Yeah, only that the Catholic priest, St. Malachi, was Irish. And so a lot of the Irish have written about these prophecies over time, and there might be some oblique references out there.
Okay, and the Irish newspapers are real excited that this decision is going to be made on March 17, St. Patrick's Day.
It may be. Now, let me pose another possibility to you. First of all, the news right now is saying that they may rush the conclave, that they may, just immediately upon, March 1, start the voting process for a new pope. Well, if they do that, they're going to have to break Catholic rules around the election of a pope, which says they have to wait for 2 weeks, have to wait for 15 days. If they do rush it, I can tell you right now that whoever is elected as pope, there's going to be a lot of Catholics who accept that he is an anti-pope because he was elected contrary to the rules for electing a pope. So if they can't start until the 15th, and they got to have a pope elected by the 17th, that's a very short period of time. It's possible, it might happen, but it could drag on for some time. There's a lot of rules around the electing of a pope, and I could, if I had time, I could go over all the whole sequestering process, the 2/3 plus 1 majority vote, the whole process. But if a new pope's not elected for 12 to 13 days, is the only time at which they then would go to a simple majority vote. So this could go on for some time.
Okay. Tom, do you have any thoughts on this news that the outgoing Pope Benedict appointed the German industrialist Mr. von Freiberg to lead the Vatican Bank? He is a member of the Knights of Malta.
Yeah, and I might write something about that at some point. The Knights of Malta have been thought for some time to be connected to covert intelligence Western operations. Whether that's true, we'll just have to wait and see. The Vatican Bank has had a lot of problems for some time. There's also questions about whether Pope Benedict stepped down to keep himself was forced out basically by the bank to keep himself from coming under criminal prosecution, not just for issues related to pedophilia and the protecting of certain cardinals who may have been, abusing, or priests who may have been abusing children, but there might be something beneath the surface here.
Well, the Vatican Bank, earlier, a few months ago, they were cut off from the international banking system. You couldn't even use, you couldn't use you couldn't withdraw money from an ATM in Vatican City, for a period of a couple months because they're being sanctioned by the international banking system.
Right. Yeah, and there's one other thing. We're not going to have time now to talk about it today. I probably should come back and talk to you about it after the conclave. And this is like out there in some people's mind. But the second part of our investigation, the first part was Petrus Romanus, the final pope is here. And then things began developing behind the scenes that led us to write a new book. It's going to be in print here in about 4 weeks. It's called Exo Vaticana, and it has to do with why Rome is suddenly interested in creating doctrine that would accommodate the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence. And for anybody listening to this that thinks that I suddenly made a leap out into Lulu land, they're going to be astonished by the documents that were provided to us by leaders in Rome, including Guy Cosmonago, who is one of the leading astronomers for the Vatican. And here's what I'm going to predict to you, that the coming pope, whoever he is going to make a papal decree. Now, what people need to remember is that a pope can speak, what do they call it, vicarious filii Dei. He can speak as the voice of God, and he can pass a dogma. And then that dogma becomes the true teachings of the church. And if you don't accept those teachings, well, then you're heretic. You may still get to go to heaven somehow, but you have not accepted the correct teachings of the church. And I'm telling you that the new pope, and probably sooner than later, is going to be involved in the issuance of a new dogma, a papal decree that is directly connected to the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence. Now, for some time, people are going to listen to the show and they're going to say, okay, this guy just lost all credibility. He's a nut job. But this book is 700 pages, many of which are the actual documents from the Vatican's Opus Dei level theologians who have provided this material for us, and it's not us that's saying that, it's them that's saying it.
Well, Tom, you have an open invitation to be here the moment that book comes out. I will be waiting for it. It is going to be a blockbuster of a book. And Tom expects to have it out in 4 to 6 weeks. You can order it at his website, RaidersNewsUpdate.com, and I'm sure it'll be on Amazon and everything else. Tom, we will have you back, and we'll pick up this conversation in several months when you get the new book out. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, you know what's ironic, Rick, is that one of the very first shows I ever agreed to do on radio in which we talked about a great deception that would involve the existence of alien life, I did with Rick Wiles, with you many years ago when your show was actually called something else.
Yeah, I think that show was probably the year 99 or 2000.
Yep, you were one of the very first guys I ever agreed to do that with, and how it has come full circle.
And here we are. And I've always believed, as I think you have too, there's a day coming that, the greatest deception Satan is going to use on the human race will be space aliens, which are nothing more than demons. But I will not be surprised if an alien spacecraft lands on Earth. Satan walks out and tells the human race, "I'm your daddy."
Well, it's not going to just be Catholics, so let's be sure about that.
Oh, no, the whole
people.
No, the whole planet is going to buy into this big lie.